Yes, I am aware that it's a little bright, but that's because I want to test the dynamic range of Vlog-L versus some of the other picture profiles on the GH4. Now, Panasonic says that Vlog-L will get you an extra 2 stops of dynamic range, up to 12 stops on the GH4, while the other picture profiles will get you 10 stops. That's what they say. But I want to actually test that. So right now I've got this shot set up where I'm a little bit overexposed on my skin, and I'm in cinelike-v right now. That's what I normally shoot in, and that's what my current settings are. But I'm going to switch to Vlog-L and see if I'm getting any of the extra skin tone back. I'm just slightly overexposed to my face with a lot of light coming at me. So I'm going to switch to Vlog-L and see if we get any of that back. Now I've switched to Vlog-L, but everything else has stayed the exact same. So the lighting setup's the exact same, all the camera settings are the same, except for that picture profile. Now right now my ISO is at 800, and my aperture is at 2.8, and my shutter is actually a 360-degree shutter just to let that extra light in and overexpose my face just a bit. Normally I'd recommend shooting at 180-degree shutter, but you can see some of my other videos about that. So we're going to see if these files have a little bit more dynamic range when shooting with Vlog-L once we bring them into the computer. Just for good measure, I'm also going to throw cinelike-d into the mix. Normally I shoot with cinelike-v just because I like the way it looks a little bit better than cinelike-d, but I know there's a lot of people out there who shoot with cinelike-d, so here's what that looks like. Again, all the exact same settings, the exact same lighting setup. One final round before we bring these into the computer, I wanted to bump my ISO up to 1600 and drop my aperture down to f4 just to see if that ISO increase would give any significant benefit to dynamic range. So that's what the settings are right now. This is cinelike-v. And here's cinelike-d with those exact same settings. Again, ISO 1600, aperture at f4, shutter 360 degree. And finally, here we have Vlog-L with the exact same settings, the exact same lighting setup. So let's take this footage into the computer and see what we're working with. I've brought my clips here into speed grade, and you can immediately see that we are blowing those highlights. You can see that it is overexposed, and you definitely don't want to shoot like that, especially on skin tones. When I try and pull some of that down, you can still see that it is clipped and we're not getting that data back. But let's go over to the Vlog-L shot, and you may have already noticed this in the raw footage, but there is a lot more information there in those highlights. If I expand my range with a basic color correction, this isn't using a LUT or anything fancy, just doing a basic expansion and adding some saturation, you can see there is a lot more information. Now, I don't know if it's a full 2 stops difference, but it is nice to see that Vlog-L is doing what it's supposed to. Now let's take a look at the cinelike-d shot, and there doesn't seem to be any significant gain in terms of dynamic range between the cinelike-d and cinelike-v. In fact, for these settings in this setup, I actually prefer the look of cinelike-v. I kind of always have. I know a lot of people like cinelike-d and they have their particular methods for grading it, but I've always really liked cinelike-v. But in this shot, I think the Vlog-L wins, especially when you're trying to save these highlights like this in a scene with an expanded dynamic range. Cinelike-d and cinelike-v just can't capture it. As far as the ISO 1600 shots, there doesn't seem to be a significant difference. There may be a slightly smoother roll-off between the highlights and in the skin tones here, but compared to the ISO 800 stuff, it is almost the exact same. Certainly not anything that anyone's really going to notice the difference of. So if you feel like you need to bump your ISO to save a little bit of dynamic range, you're really not going to get that much of a difference in terms of noticeability. It's going to look almost the exact same. So don't worry about it. Probably shoot with the lower ISO values just to keep your noise down. Same thing for cinelike-d here. When we pull that down, we're not getting any of that information back. But with Vlog-L, we had that basic color, and there we go. All those highlights are back, nice and saved. So that is good to know. Now, I was shooting this internally with the 8-bit 420 codec internally on the GH4. You can have better luck using an external recorder. In fact, you might, but I wanted to test this in the worst case scenario. If you had to shoot internally and you had to shoot Vlog-L, would you be getting extra dynamic range? And yes, indeed you are. So if you are interested in Vlog-L, you can go check it out. It is unfortunately a $99 firmware upgrade, but right now I'm running a video where you can actually get it for free. So check out my other video. I'll put a link in the description to it where I'm kind of running a free giveaway for Vlog-L, and that way you might be able to get your hands on it if you don't have it already. It is good to have Vlog-L for these situations where you're dealing with extra dynamic range and you need a picture profile that's going to give you a little bit extra wiggle room in post-production, because for a shot like this, you wouldn't want to be using cinelike-d or cinelike-v. You actually should probably just light it differently instead of blowing out those skin tones, but sometimes you don't always have full control over your lighting. So with a picture profile like V-Log-L, you'll actually get a little bit more dynamic range and possibly save those highlights.